Hi all, right now I'm in the middle of mixing a track that I've written here in the studio with my wife, and the track is a Celtic folk track, but with a very strong cinematic influence. I personally struggle a lot to find good content out there on how to record and mix cinematic vocals, so I thought I would share some of my processes and ideas on the topic with you so that you can try and apply them to your own music if you want, because a lot of advice out there seems to be tailored to pop and dance producers. The first thing that I want to talk about is recording chain, and this is particularly interesting because me and Emma tried a lot of setups here in the studio, and we actually ended up using stuff that it wasn't the best things that we had available in the studio, just because worked better for the song. So for example, we tried recording with the Universal Audio 710 to Infinity preamp, but actually we ended up using the preamps from my RME Fireface 822 interface because they are absolutely crystal clean and work really well and gave me a lot of flexibility into the mixing process. And same goes with the microphone. We actually started trying with a U47, with a Neumann U47 clone that I have that sounds absolutely beautiful and is a tube preamp, but it was incredibly colored, and actually I ended up using a rather cheap Aston mic Origin, which I believe is under £200 or something like that, and actually works really well with their vocals. Another thing that I want to say is that depending on your room, depending on how good your room sounds, this is treated room, but it's quite dry and quite small. It's a home studio after all, so it's not a beautiful room. But if your room allows for cinematic music, especially when you're using vocalize like we did here, so there are no actual lyrics, I find that it's quite good to have your microphone a little farther away than you would normally do. So the classic rule of thumb is that you have the singer put her or his hand like that, and this is typically a good distance. I personally find that going a little further, it's even better for cinematic music, so that you get less of that sort of proximity effect. But this is only if your room allows it. If your room has a lot of reverberation, is not treated, is not dry enough, that obviously will capture more of the room, so it won't work as well. Last thing that I want to say, and I'm gonna say this because I did a very big mistake myself in this session, is use closed back headphones while tracking. I normally use Audio-Technica M50X, which are closed back and work really well at isolating the click track on your singer or a musician. And this time I didn't have them around me, and I actually used Sennheiser HD 650, which are fantastic headphones, which I use all the time for mixing when I'm not in the studio, but they are open back and the click bleed is quite noticeable, especially because Emma wanted it particularly loud in this track to get some of the timing and the rubato feel right that you'll see here. And now I ended up with a lot of clicks that I'm gonna need to remove in Isotope Racks. So save yourself some time and track properly, unlike me. Okay, let's get into it. So this is the lead melody that we recorded first. I'm gonna mute the background vocals because I want to talk about them separately. The first thing that we recorded after we got the lead right, which took a few takes because we were sort of writing it as we recorded, was to get a second take of the lead but with a more rubato feel. So here it is. If I stuck it on top of the first version, you'll see that it doesn't work because it's shifted in time. Get that chorusy effect. So you see that the phrasing is quite different. The reason I recorded this is that because I want to have option. First of all, while mixing and editing, I might decide that I want to make a particular section thicker, and in that case I can stack them and pan them left or right, or simply maybe I can reuse these in an outro and slim down the arrangement and use the more rubato feel to end the track. But for now I'm gonna mute it. Moving on, we started working on some harmonies. I personally like to work starting from the bottom note of the chord. I find that this helps the singers very much to stay in tune when you start stacking voices on top of each other. I basically record everything twice so that you can double the vocals and pan them left and right. Now, if you're working with male vocalists, bass notes, so lower notes in the frequency spectrum, typically better not doubled, otherwise you get a lot of phasing issues that can sound weird. And in general, our ears are not as good as placing bass frequencies in the stereo spectrum versus higher frequencies. But with female vocalists, especially Emma, that is a soprano, you can get away with doubling everything and panning everything left and right. So we did this. So this is the first internal voice that we recorded, and you'll hear it. It's all on the right and doubled with another take on the left. Here it is. And just quickly, I'm going to go through the other voices that we recorded. So we recorded 3 internal voices, or rather 2 internal voice and another voice which is on top of the melody actually. I'm going to unmute them one by one, and you'll notice that I recorded everything twice, and everything is panned our left and our right for a doubling feel. I'm gonna need to do some level matching and use some compression to get them tight and get the dynamic right. So these are the internal voices. As a reference, this is how it sounds with the lead unmuted. Cool. And finally, the top voice that sounds higher than the 2 internal voices, again doubled. And with the guitar and everything else, but without the counter melodies, which we are gonna cover next. Here how it sounds. You notice that the sound is much thicker, the arrangement is much fuller, you get less gaps in the frequency spectrum, although obviously the acoustic guitar and the harp are particularly loud here, so we're obviously gonna mix them. We are now at the pre-mixing stage. What we did next is to record some counter melodies. So I'm going to solo the lead, and I'm going to move between the counter 2, 3, and 4 that we recorded. So here's voice 2. Another phrase in the bass. We got this one too. It's quite beautiful and interesting. And here's the fourth one. So these are a few alternatives that I did, and the reason why I did it is that I want to be able to add them as I want to add some variation. So I might do something like this, for example. Let's mute them all with the just muting the clips, and I might do something like I might add this one here and these two here. Let's see how it sounds. It's quite an interesting chord that we did, so I might leave that in. And I might have everything on for the last couple of bars. So basically this gives me options during the arrangement, which are quite important to have, also because you're typically working with a client and he or she might want things differently. So this gives you options without going back into the studio, bringing the singer back in and re-recording everything, which is quite important. Okay, now I want to have a quick look at the section that comes after this, because there are some hummings, so basically the sound, which is very hard to get right because of a couple of reasons. The first reason is that when humming, obviously there is only a certain dynamic that the singer can do. It can't, or she can't, project the sound properly, so it's typically very quiet. You are sort of forced for this reason to get closer to the microphone, which can create proximity effect, which sort of makes it sound very muddy and close up, which can also be used to your own advantage to give a more intimate feel, but you need to sort of be careful and typically use a lot of EQing. Let's listen to what we recorded right now. So again, this is the lead, but at on the second verse, so there is a little variation, and here are the two humming tracks that we recorded, which again are doubled and mixed left and right and panned left and right. So here's lead one, humming one. You see how much she struggled to get the intonation right. On that note, we had to do quite a few takes, because when you're humming, I guess, again, you have way less control over your voice. And here's the second take that we took, and it's currently panned to the right. Voice broke a little bit there, so we might need to fix that, but altogether it sounds like this. Let's listen from the beginning. Okay, I'm gonna need to work a little bit during the mixing for these humming tracks, but they do add something to the arrangement, and I'm quite happy with them, and we are going to leave them in as an option and as a variation for the arrangement. Okay, let's start a little bit about the mixing process. I'm far from being done here, but I want to show you what I did so that you can get a little starting point. So first thing, very important with cinematic vocals, is a very big lush reverb. I like particularly using FabFilter Pro R for this. It comes with a vocal hole large preset that works really well with cinematic vocals. I typically tweak the time and the post EQ, although I might also use a pre EQ added on the mixer in Cubase for the background vocals. But let's bypass the send for a second. And you notice how dry this sounds. We recorded it very dry. And here with space on. I hear that click track, I hate it, but I'm going to fix it. So this is the basic reverb. Quite a generous amount. There's way more reverb than I would use on anything else, but I think with cinematic vocals, especially with this sort of Celtic, dreamy vibe, I think it's important to get that sound right. Other than that, let me bypass everything else. I was just trying stuff here, but I used the Lindell AD channel, and I did this because, as I said, we recorded with the RME Fireface preamps, which are incredibly clean. So this was to give it a bit more color and a tiny bit of compression, but you'll notice that the compression is just at 2:1 ratio and is literally just kissing the meter, so to speak. Let's actually bypass the reverb so we can hear it better, and let's bypass the channel. This without and with. You see how it's the compressor is working on these very high notes, and then I used some EQ, and I personally love the Mag EQ4 on vocals because it has this hair gain which works so well. So this without and with. Actually noticing just now that the compression it's even a bit much for me, so I'm going to let the raise the threshold a little bit for the compressor, but the ratio is so low that it's not really bothering me too much. Then I did some EQing. I mostly got rid of this frequency, which is quite nasal, and I'm actually gonna probably do a little bit more, maybe with some dynamic EQing. And I got rid of some high frequencies. Here, actually, we could even go with an 18 dB per octave, if not 24. There isn't much content down there. After the EQ, I actually stacked another compressor on, the Acme Opticom XLA3. I really like the color that this compressor gives to vocals, but I want to leave these vocals quite open without squashing the dynamics too much. So I added this because I think I'm gonna need it, particularly in this second section here. Bypass it. So I'm gonna leave it in, but I think I'm going to bypass it for this first section where I don't think it's needed because the arrangement is quite more complex. So yes, I might bypass it in this first section over here. In fact, let's do this right away. So I need to go on more, insert, so we're gonna need to add the lane, and we want bypass, add it on as a lane, and then I want for this first section the bypass to be on, and then to go off right here. So let's see if it works. I have it on here. And kick in here. Okay, that works really well. Moving on, the last thing that I did was to add some saturation on the vocals. This is something that I use a lot on female vocals. You basically just add some fizzle on the very high end. So I use Southern for this because it has a very nice multi-band feature. So for this particular band over here, I just use the subtle saturation and I crank the drive a little bit. Listen to the high frequencies and it gives it a bit more presence. And actually I turned the level down, so it's also working as an EQ, but with the drive up you can hear that sizzle on the top. Can also try some different saturation algorithms. Gentle works really well, I think. And you can work on the crossover frequency. So yeah, it is a very rough mix of the vocals. Let's put the reverb back in. I had these percussions that which are MIDI and go out of time. This comes from Celtic Kira. Bodron over here. I used the loop for the first one and then I sequenced it for the later part. Love Celtic Kira, sounds really good, but this loop tend to go off sync unless I start it from the beginning. So I think this is a good, very rough mix. And let's move on to the background vocals for a minute. So for the background vocals, I obviously routed absolutely everything to a group track, which I have over here, and I did all my processing here. So I sent it to the same exact same reverb. Let's listen to it, and let's listen to it dry as a comparison. And actually used a very similar processing. So again, Lindell 80 channel, the Opticum to squeeze the dynamics a little bit. Let's bypass everything else and let's listen to these two compressors here. Helps getting the dynamics right, but I also want to do some fader adjustments here on the mixer after this stage, because there are some tiny automations that I want to get right with the volume, which I'm going to do next. Other than that, again, I have some EQing to fix some resonances and giving it a tiny bit of a shelving EQ. You hear this hiss. Helps giving it a bit more presence in context. I cut here a little bit so that it doesn't clash with the lead. I think they work okay together, and again I use the same saturation trick over here. I use the algorithm worm tape here. And finally, this is something that I do a lot on background vocals, and I use it on everything else really. I love it on the mix bus as well. Kramer Tape to widen the sound a little bit. Bypassed. Unfortunately, because of my recording software, I don't seem to. I'm getting some very bad CPU spikes, and I can manage to bypass smoothly. So hopefully you can hear what's going on. Sorry about that. But this is pretty much everything. Let's have a quick listen to it. And again, it's gonna need some refinements, but it's just, to get in the ballpark. I'm gonna need to have to mix those guitars, but I think you get the point. I really love working with vocals. It's something that I don't get to do enough, and I loved writing this song with my wife. But as I said, there doesn't seem to be a lot of content specifically on working with cinematic vocals. So if you have any advice, I'm very keen on learning, and please let me know down below in the comments. And subscribe if this content was useful for you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.